morning. It's July 15th, 2026, and welcome to your early morning Stylo News Intelligence Update. In today's explainer, we're taking a completely objective look at the cascading events of the past 2 weeks in the Middle East. Specifically, we'll be analyzing the renewed military friction between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States. We're relying strictly on the absolute latest strategic estimates here, just separating the facts from the speculation for you.
Now, before we get started, this briefing is brought to you by ProWave AI. They're the developers behind Stylo Intel Ops, which is an incredibly powerful AI-driven open-source intelligence program, as well as Stylo News, the commercial engine giving you on-demand global situational awareness right across the web and your mobile devices.
All right, let's dive right into this. We've structured today's explainer into 5 key intelligence domains to give you a clear, balanced picture of the operational environment. We'll start with a situation report. Look at the multi-level impacts, examine key perspectives, analyze the information environment, and finally, check the watch list to see what we might expect next.
So, starting off with Section 1, our situation report, the ceasefire collapse.
That fragile interim peace agreement from just last month? Well, it's effectively unraveled. On July 8th, U.S. President Donald Trump announced the end of the ceasefire at a NATO summit, pointing to Iranian attacks on commercial vessels. And almost immediately, spanning July 8th and 9th, the U.S. launched extensive airstrikes on roughly 90 Iranian military and strategic civilian targets. In response, on July 9th, Iran launched retaliatory missile and drone strikes against U.S. military installations in neighboring Gulf countries. And it's important to note, all of this unfolded exactly while massive nationwide funeral processions were taking place for Iran's recently assassinated Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The sheer geographical breadth of this escalation is immense, with events widely dispersed across the entire region. U.S. strikes hit southern port cities and critical infrastructure, heavily disrupting the major railway between Tehran and Mashhad. Meanwhile, Iran's retaliatory strikes landed on bases in places like Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar. But what's really crucial to understand is the heavy clustering of activity right around the Strait of Hormuz. That remains the most critical flashpoint right now. It's a vital artery for global oil transit, and it's currently facing severe disruption due to these hostilities.
Moving right along to Section 2, multi-level impacts, cascading consequences.
Our intelligence estimates outline 3 distinct impact zones here. Locally, we're seeing some very significant disruption. The targeting of that Tehran-Mashhad rail line severely impacted civilian travel, right during a period of national mourning, contributing to at least 14 reported deaths and structural damage across 5 different provinces. Now, nationally, the Iranian leadership, which is now largely made up of former Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps officers, is rapidly consolidating power. Those funeral processions really fostered a unified, nationalist defiance against the recent strikes. And then internationally, the attacks on vessels and the regional crossfire have caused a sharp drop in tanker transit through the Strait of Hormuz. That directly threatens global energy markets and has drawn some deep concern from both the UN and NATO.
This brings us to Section 3, Key Perspectives, the Strategic Chessboard.
What we're witnessing here is a serious clash of calculated risks and fundamentally opposing strategic doctrines. The United States strategy, driven by the current administration, is one of maximum pressure. They're conducting strikes to actively degrade Iran's military infrastructure and ensure freedom of navigation in the region. But interestingly, they're still signaling an openness to resume talks. On the flip side, the Iranian strategy is heavily focused on asserting territorial sovereignty. They're executing what intelligence estimates are calling calibrated defensive retaliation. The goal there is to impose costs and control the Strait of Hormuz, but doing so while very carefully managing the threshold so they don't accidentally trigger a full-scale war.
Next up is Section 4, the information environment, open source sentiment. Let's look at how this is playing out publicly. When we analyze the social media landscape, specifically over on X, it reveals a highly polarized but very distinct pattern. A massive chunk of the conversation is actually just neutral, factual, open-source intelligence reporting, people basically tracking the strikes and watching oil prices. But the dominant sentiment among regional and diaspora users is a deep wariness and disapproval of the escalation. You're seeing a lot of anxiety over regional destabilization. Then there's a third, smaller but highly active segment of pro-regime accounts, and they're framing Iran's military actions strictly as a justified, defensive response to outside aggression. And we're seeing this exact polarization mirrored in the global press, where the editorial focus diverges wildly, depending on where you look. France 24, for example, is delivering a very analytical take, focusing heavily on the complex mechanics of diplomacy alongside the conflict. Al Jazeera is notably shifting its coverage to the human cost, the disruptions to daily civilian life, and the very real anxiety of neighboring Gulf states who are just hoping to avoid a broader war. Conversely, Fox News is framing the events primarily through the lens of strong U.S. resolve, highlighting the strikes as necessary countermeasures to Iranian aggression. Finally, we turn to Section 5, the watch list, strategic projections.
Right now, our intelligence analysts are tracking 3 priority intelligence requirements, or PIREs, to help forecast what happens over the next few weeks. Number 1, will Iran attack Israel directly? Number 2, will the Iranian regime be able to maintain internal control amidst the shock of losing its supreme leader and dealing with these ongoing infrastructure strikes? And number 3, will Iran continue to strike American forces and allies in the Gulf region?
So let's see how those requirements build into our most probable course of action. Current estimates suggest that over the coming days, Iran is going to favor Step 1, calibrated asymmetric escalation. Basically, that means relying on proxy networks, drones, and maritime disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, rather than jumping into overt warfare. Step 2 involves a very deliberate avoidance of a decisive direct strike on Israel. Doing so would likely trigger an overwhelming, regime-threatening counterattack, which they absolutely want to avoid. All of this leads us to Step 3. Despite the heated rhetoric out there, there's a surprisingly strong potential for both sides to actually resume mediated technical talks in Islamabad, focusing on nuclear programs and restoring maritime security.
To really sum up this situation, the current intelligence estimate puts it concisely, stating, Iran is posturing for deterrence, preserving regime cohesion, and likely favoring asymmetric escalation options over immediate direct war. Essentially, both nations are projecting strength and trying to dictate the terms of any future engagement. It's created a very dangerous but highly calculated regional stalemate. The big question for all of us observing this now is whether this delicate calibration is going to hold, or if a single miscalculation in the Gulf might force the next fatal decision.
And that concludes this morning's explainer of the current intelligence picture. Now, if you want a deeper analysis spanning the full last 2 weeks of events in this region, make sure to listen to the full Iran, the United States, and the Countdown to the Next Decision podcast. You can find that on your favorite channel or just by following the link in this post. Thank you so much for joining this explainer. Remember to subscribe to Stylo News, where you can get AI-powered news on demand directly at stylonews.com. Have a steady, informed day, and we'll see you next time.